President Biden speaking out about hostage negotiations with Hamas. That's as the U.S. is deploying more forces to prevent the war from widening. Joining us now live is NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What did the president say today about the hostage situation?
Good evening to you, Steve. So today at an event this afternoon, a reporter asked President Biden if he would support a ceasefire in exchange for the release of hostages. Here's what President Biden said. Watch.
Why did you? We should have a ceasefire. It's not a ceasefire. We should have those hostages released, and then we can talk.
So we did hear President Biden correct himself a little bit there, but the idea is that President Biden called on Hamas to release hostages before entertaining the prospect of any talks regarding a ceasefire. And the White House today also called on the public to not trust Hamas' words regarding reports that it would release hostages for a potential ceasefire. Here's what White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby told us this afternoon. Watch.
We got to take anything that Hamas says with a huge grain of salt. We don't take anything that they say at face value. Here's an idea, and it's just an idea I'll throw out there. They could release them all now. Just let them go now, because these people didn't do anything wrong. They're just innocent civilians being caught up in this conflict. Let them go now. Now, I recognize that's not going to happen, which is why we're going to keep working with our partners in the region to do what we can to get them released.
And Kirby said that he wouldn't go into details regarding any negotiations when it comes to hostages right now, because he says that would risk the opportunities of getting more of them out. But Kirby today did tell us that the White House continued to believe that among the 10 Americans still missing, they still believe that there are about a handful of them who have been taken hostage by Hamas. Steve.
Very serious situation there, Iris. In addition to the hostage situation, what is the administration doing to strengthen our posture in the Middle East, especially after a spate of recent drone and rocket attacks on American troops in the region?
So the White House today did comment on these attacks, specifically calling out Iran they said that Iran directed some of them to actually do them by actively facilitating these attacks, but also he says it has been supporting the groups behind these attacks for a long time. Meanwhile, in response, the White House says President Biden has directed the Department of Defense to strengthen U.S. posture in the region, including by directing 2 U.S. carrier strikes groups to be deployed to that region, of course, now sending more air defense capabilities to U.S. air bases in the Middle East. And of course, the goal there is to try to deter any countries in that region from trying to join in and widen this war. Steve.
NTD's Iris Tao reporting from the White House. Iris, thank you. Chinese espionage. FBI Director Christopher Wray now speaking out about Chinese intimidation tactics. This comes amid unrest in the Middle East and potential involvement from China.
We have certainly seen instances where the Chinese government, in a variety of ways, working through proxies or other actors, have attempted to harass, intimidate, stalk, surveil, threaten Chinese dissidents, Chinese Americans, especially those who criticize the CCP and the current regime.
Wray emphasized the threat from the Chinese regime, saying there's no country that presents a broader, more comprehensive threat to the U.S. He added that there are over 2,000 active investigations related to the CCP's efforts to steal information, including Americans' personal data. Cutting-edge technology, once again back in the spotlight amid strained U.S.-China relations. Washington is now rolling out new export restrictions targeting shipments of microchips to China that can be used in AI. Is this a step toward a full decoupling from the communist nation? To find out, we have Paul Rosenzweig, former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. Paul Rosenzweig, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to be with you.
Great to have you, Paul. The Biden administration just last week announcing further cracking down of exports on artificial intelligence chips, AI chips, and manufacturing equipment to China. What measures do you think will be implemented to mitigate these risks associated with technology transfer?
Well, we're at the start of a process right now. I think that the Biden administration's decision to further restrict exports is a good thing. One of the as yet unexamined questions is the nature of American technology companies' interactions in China already, which doesn't involve the export of technology, but involves cooperative ventures with them. There was a recent report on that by the American Security Project that kind of outlined how deeply embedded American technology is in China. I think that a third focus will be on the import of Chinese technology to the United States. That's something that the House Select Committee on China is looking at very closely. So taken together, these three things I think signal a where the Chinese don't like it when we say it, but a decoupling of American technology from China as a way of reducing our risk.
Yeah, Paul, some really interesting points, and I want to follow up on them. Given the fact that restrictions may impact American companies' bottom line, how should governments and corporations, multinational corporations, come to terms that profit over principle isn't a sustainable model? And so do you think that there's going to be sort of this aha moment that needs to be had, that greener pastures and alternative revenue streams might be in other places if they were to, like you said, decouple?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Look, I don't blame American companies for wanting to maximize their profits. That's what they're in the business of doing. What they've failed, I think, to realize, speaking about just as an economic thing, it's not just profits over principle, though for me, the idea of contributing technology to help the Chinese subjugate the Uyghur minority is a bad thing on principle, but it's going to be bad economics as well. Increasingly, I think American companies are going to see that they have to pick a flag, so to speak, choose a side, not because of principle, but because the law is going to increasingly require them to decouple. And most American tech companies have yet to really come to grips with that. They haven't yet done a risk assessment of what they should be doing. They haven't developed adequate contingency plans. And the real downside is that they're in vulnerable positions themselves. They don't understand yet how deeply embedded they are in China and how much it's going to hurt when some event compels them to decouple, whether it's increased economic sanctions, further sanctions from the Biden government, or, Lord help us and hope it doesn't happen, a shooting war of some sort between China and Taiwan.
So, Paul, how effective do you think with these, new actions that the Biden administration will take will be in terms of including subsidiaries located outside of China and preventing them from circumventing, or the CCP from circumventing export controls, which they often do through various means, whether it's, say, sending the parts first to a country with less export controls like Hong Kong and then having them shipped into China?
Well, the effectiveness of the Biden administration's actions is going to comes down to what's always the case, which is implementation, enforcement and implementation. It's going to take real devotion of resources, real focus of effort. I will say that this is an area rare in Washington today, where there seems to be relatively significant bipartisan agreement on the need to take action. Nobody in Congress is saying that the Biden administration shouldn't be doing what it would be doing, neither Republicans nor Democrats. And indeed, the criticism, if there's any, is that it hasn't gone far enough. So I imagine that when and if we actually return to a functioning government in Washington, there'll be an adequate devotion of resources in subsequent budgetary cycles. And that will require the implementation of procedures, the development of rules. It will require, frankly, a concerted effort by the administration and Congress to talk to the American tech companies, the Microsofts, AWSs, Oracles, and Metas, who are still deeply embedded there, and tell them that they need to get kind of their act together. But I actually am moderately optimistic at the possibility of effective action on this issue, at least.
Paul Rosenzweig, as always, really appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
House Republicans have gone back to the drawing board yet again today for the third time, meeting to select a new Speaker nominee. This after Congressman Jim Jordan failing to get enough support to secure the gavel last week. And NTD's Melina Wisecup has some updates for us from the Capitol. Melina, tell us what the game plan is for Republicans as they enter week 3 without a Speaker.
Well, Steve, Republicans are headed once again back behind closed doors in their third attempt to try to choose a nominee that can win enough support to secure the gavel. They're meeting at 6:30 tonight for a candidate forum where all 9 of these candidates will be laying out their vision for the House of Representatives. Now, what we'll be looking at mostly tomorrow when they have their internal vote on their nominee is how well that nominee actually fares, because this could actually tell us a lot for what we're looking for the week ahead. As we remember, Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan coming out of that nomination vote, they were falling far shy from what they would have needed to secure the gavel. So we're going to be looking to see how that vote turns out tomorrow morning. That will be kind of an indicator to see how fractured is the Republican Party still at this moment on choosing their speaker. So we'll be looking for that. Now, as for the candidates, the 9 candidates, most of them are not even in the ranks of leadership. The person with the highest level among leadership, his position, that is Tom Emmer. He's the Republican whip right now. He's not necessarily a household name. He has won the endorsement of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He did try to win also support from former President Trump. We're seeing reports that he also made a phone call to Trump, although Trump did withhold his nomination from Emmer, and he withheld his nomination from any other candidate. His endorsement from any other candidate in that case. Now, Emmer, the key about him is that he may have some trouble getting support from the most conservative members in the Republican conference, specifically because he supports legislation that those conservatives are not necessarily ready to accept. These are things such as Ukraine aid. He supported the continuing resolution that got McCarthy ousted in the first place. He also supported the same-sex marriage legislation back last year. So these are some of the challenges, Steve, that Tom Emmer will face as he faces the most conservative ends within his own conference. Now, of the people who aren't in the leadership position, the one that stands out to me the most is Byron Donalds from Florida. He is a very new congressman. He makes quite frequent media appearances, but he also is interesting because he was the only one of these candidates that actually rejected Kevin McCarthy back in January and forced him to make concessions. So we'll be looking at both of these candidates throughout tonight and as well as tomorrow morning to see how they fare in this race.
Melina, certainly a lot of moving parts here. The optics here domestically are one thing. I think people can draw their own conclusions. As for how this looks on the world stage, some Democrats are now saying that the division within the Republican Party may be helping our adversaries. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so specifically, Steve, there's a group of Democrats that are in that House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and they're actually requesting now top intelligence officials here in the U.S. to hold a classified briefing to discuss specifically how the Chinese Communist Party is actually leveraging this chaos and dysfunction in the House of Representatives to create anti-United States propaganda. So Democrats are arguing that Republicans are causing the United States to look really bad on the world stage and specifically allowing an opening for adversaries like China to come and attack the U.S. They're actually requesting specifically the National Director of Intelligence and the CIA Director to come and give that classified briefings. They've sent out a list of questions to them. However, the top Democrat in that committee says that if Republicans are able to choose able to choose a speaker by the end of this week, that they won't continue on with this classified briefing. But this definitely does put some pressure on Republicans, and so we'll be looking to see how they deal with all this as they attend their candidate forum tonight and tomorrow's internal vote. Steve?
NTD's Melina Wisecup from Capitol Hill. Thank you, Melina. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.